Please welcome the subject of the talk, the great, the all-powerful, the Gorgon! Ancient Greek word gorgos, which means terrible or dreadful, possibly originating as an onomatopoeia of the word garg in Sanskrit, an ancient South Asian language known as a philosophical language of Hinduism and relating religions. An onomatopoeia is a word that phonetically imitates or suggests the sound that it describes, such as the words chirp, meow, hiccup, swish, or roar. Garg, gorgos, gorgon. Here are the topics that will be discussed in this entire episode, all parts included, starting with origin and history, physiology, the science of the Gorgon, as well as exploring its different appearances and character, classification, life, involving culture and society, tool, weapon, and armor usage, as well as magic, the Gorgon's strengths and weaknesses, factions, the power level we've assigned it, all the similar beasts out there, and finally a list of movies where you can find the Gorgon.
History and origin.
Here's where the confusion behind the Gorgon's humanoid and bull portrayals will be disambiguated. Perhaps the earliest mentioning of the Gorgon as we know it today by this name, or the Gorgon's head, within Homer's ancient manuscript, Iliad, of around 730 to 700 BCE. Here the Gorgon's wicked face appears as ornamentation on Agamemnon's shield and Athena's aegis. The Gorgon is a phantom of the underworld and the context is simple but soon gains momentum. Gorgons and their complexities were first written about within the book Theogony, which was written by Greek poet Hesiod or Hesiod, who lived between 700 and 600 BCE.
And the Gorgons who dwell beyond glorious ocean, in the frontier lands towards night, where are the clear-voiced Hesperides, Stheno and Uriel, and Medusa, who suffered a woeful fate. She was mortal, but the two were undying and grew not old.
This is also the earliest recorded mentioning of Medusa. And from here on forth within Greek art, the Gorgon took on various forms, always with the face directed at the viewer. As described by Homer, the face appeared hideous, meant to frighten the opponent. Curly hair, large fangs, a protruding thick tongue, and beneath it all, a beard, though it is also debated as being hair from behind. The figure took upon a normal humanoid form with the additions of one or two pairs of wings, as well as often being depicted with having swirly boots. Different variations continued to emerge, such as a Gorgon with a more centaur-like body to one resembling that of a hippocampus sort. Medusa of Hesiod's tale became more and more popularized as within the Greek myth, she was one out of the three Gorgon sisters to be mortal. These Gorgons were parented by the sea god and goddess Phorcys and sister wife Gato, who in some myths also parented the great Echidna. The Gorgon took upon a more feminine facial appearance with, at times, wings upon her head, ranging from young and attractive to serpentine, as later stories told of all three Gorgons having hair of serpents and the power to turn anyone into stone that gazed upon them. By 8 AD or CE, Roman poet Ovid brought forth more depth to the story, explaining that only Medusa had venomous snakes for hair due to being cursed by goddess Athena for attracting god Poseidon with her gold hair and beauty so much that he violated her. Athena also affixed a curse upon Medusa that would turn anyone who stared upon her into stone. In this mythos, Gorgoaix, primal Gorgon, was also sometimes referred to as Medusa's father. Although this is an episode about the general Gorgon, aspects of the most influential one, Medusa, had to be mentioned. If you'd like a more in-depth reach into mythology behind Medusa, do let me know below. Archaeologist Marija Gimbutas argues that the Gorgon face may date further back than 6000 BCE, originating in Sesklo culture, and this is interesting as the Gorgon's roots may not only go back further than 8th century BCE, but to a different land all in all. I speak of the Humbaba, which was first mentioned in the second tablet of the Epic of Gilgamesh, written in 2100 BCE in Mesopotamia. Humbaba was a guardian of Cedar Forest, where the gods lived. He is described as having a face of a lion, the look of death. Sounds similar? A roar that is a flood, breath that is fire, and exceptional hearing. Looking at the portrayals of the great Humbaba, it is reasonable to see a chance that the early designs of the Gorgon could have been the product of cultural evolution upon Humbaba. But there lurks a greater phenomenon behind its design, which will lead us into its symbolism. Frightening faces like that of the Gorgons have appeared worldwide, such as the one at the center of the Mayan calendar, to that of Kali's, with a similar expression and exposed tongue. Do they relate? Have they been passed on from older societies to newer? Considering the positioning of the Gorgon's face, for instance above doorways and on shields, it was clearly being treated as an apotropaic symbol, a symbol to ward off evil similar to the likes of Nazars, Nazars, or gargoyles. Consequently, the Gorgon's physical inspirations came from the natural world, from the intimidating appearances of the snake and the lion, as this feline's impressions were just as chaotic in usage. In some traditions, the Gorgon was also a personification of Earth, herself being a creation of Gaia's, though upon further exploration on the more malevolent side of its appearance, we happen upon another horrifying entity. One can hardly argue that the Gorgon hadn't originated to some degree from the Assyrian winged demon of the underworld, Pazuzu. Pazuzu, a snake embodying bearded female, at times. The likeness in appearance is undeniable, and even its description nicely correlates.
Pazuzu was no doubt evil. However, the demon was actually invoked as protection against evil.
Similar to the use of the Gorgon's head against evil?
Being such a frightening image that all lesser demons and spirits would flee at its sight.
Circa 2000 to 1000 BCE. Other notable and similar figures are the Oni of ancient Japan and the Hindu Kirtimukha, whose motifs have been around since the Shang dynasty. Then there was the Egyptian snake deity, Apep or Apep, also known as Apophis, who signified chaos that may relate somewhere with the history of the Gorgon, as it does with the conniving snake of the later Abrahamic religions. Archaeological findings hint at belief in this deity spanning as far back as 4000 BCE. It seems Maria Gimbutas may have had a strong theory about the Gorgon's roots dating so far back, as we are nearing that point of 6000 BCE currently in our search. This subject of snake-like deities and snake worship is a huge topic of its own. Why another greatly linked entity is the creationist god Quetzalcoatl, which I have made an in-depth video about and must recommend to anyone fascinated in this most ancient of scaly subjects. But there are always further analyses corresponding with various belief systems, particularly in Medusa's case, with her story bringing up interpretations in the themes of how powerful women should be limited, or even male castration. The Gorgon is truly unique, particularly when observing its evolved abilities and details in appearance. To further track down relating monsters out there and possible inspirations to its physical changes and origin, stay tuned for the Similar Beasts section. It's a great place for you to expand on your research. Oh yes, and what about that Gorgon bull? Was it simply a manifestation of Dungeons & Dragons lore creators? In 1607, Edward Topsell published a bestiary entitled The History of Four-Footed Beasts. Here he describes a terrible creature, similar to an ox which feeds on herbs that enable it to exhale poisonous breath. Topsell also speaks of an African Gorgon, also known as Cadoplepas or Cadoplepas, which was based off the wildebeest. This creature could apparently turn people into stone with its stare or breath, and thereupon we see that influence of the Greek Gorgon and its awful ability upon this quadruped. Speculating on the combination of the two beasties above and the originally named Greek Gorgon, we can draw a rough conclusion of how the bovine Gorgon type came into being within some of today's lore.
Physiology.
The anatomy of the Gorgon can range from being very relatable to our own to quite complex depending on the physical structuring we go with. The Gorgon could be presented as an enormous, terrifying head phantom, to a half-lion, half-fish-bodied creature, to being centaur-like, to having a hermaphrodite demonic winged appearance, to being lower snake-bodied, to being an attractive human female, all with or without the combinations of being entirely scaled with or without snakes atop the head, or wings, and of course with or without the ability to change humans and possibly other creatures to stone. We'll fiddle with the appearance shortly. Let's first explore the physiology of how it can all work, focusing on the more fantastical areas of the Gorgon. And first and foremost, we shall explore the area that most commonly stays consistent. The Gorgons or Medusas, if you want to stay truer to Hesiod's telling, ability to turn people to stone. This feature can be expressed in also a variety of ways, as the original writings were not so clear. Those who simply look at the Gorgon turn to stone.
I like to be looked at, and I like to look too.
Those that the Gorgon looks at turn to stone. Or, how most seem to entertain this idea, those turn to stone that make eye contact with the Gorgon. Something to consider if you're currently working on a lore involving a Gorgon or Gorgons. Maybe your Gorgon has yet a more interesting way of turning trespassers to stone. Or maybe it's not even stone, but some other type of material that is very prized among apothecaries. Back on point. While this ability can be shrugged off as just being magic, many lore writers of today will not simply just stop there. Even the science of magic is explained in depth in some writings. I like to remove that dividing line between magic and science and merely state that magic is a science that is not yet understood. So with the stoning ability, starting with the eye contact method, one more believable explanation could be that the victim is put into a state of hypnosis. Possibly some white noise from a rattle at the end of the snake tail might assist in this. Within this hypnosis, the Gorgon directs a manipulative suggestion into the wanderer's mind that encourage it into a full belief that the person is frozen or petrified. The hypnosis being so powerful as to keep the victim immobile until starvation or something even worse kills it. In this case, it would make most sense that the Gorgons stay present at all times. This may also be a reason for not seeing petrified animals within the vicinity of a Gorgon, as their minds would be too simple to fall to such mental exploitation. Another explanation to the stoning gaze ability pertaining to any of the aforementioned methods could be via rays or waves. This, more in line with magic, would relate to, simply put, energy waves encompassing such complex structures that when in contact with skin or flesh would restructure the carbon base away from other elements, resulting in a very fragile, dark silhouette of a victim upon a puddle of diverted bodily fluids, mostly water. Depending on the approach, these waves could be emitted off the entire Gorgon or through directed channels from the pupils in its eyes. A thing to keep in mind here as a creator could be to pay close attention to showing how and from where the stoning process begins on or in the sufferer. What other fascinating ways can you think up in bringing realism as we know it to the stone gaze? The other notable peculiarity that doesn't always show in the versions of the Gorgon is the snake-bodied bottom half. Imagining the skeletal and exterior structure is much less of a challenge than the interior anatomy. Would most of it remain the same, being predominantly in the human portion of the creature, leaving for a long serpentine bottom lined with muscles to provide for a powerful base and offensive point, with one lightly vulnerable region within, the cloaca or cloacae, and the canals that lead to it within the body. Here the cloacae also neatly helps to blur the definite sex of the creature, as the scale that covers it holds the secret of the creature's gender. The cloacae within the vent in snakes and some other animals releases excrement as well as eggs for reproduction. In males, the hemipenes can be found below it, and in the topic of hermaphroditism, this is where both male and female sexual organs can exist, although in this case, zoologists refer to it as being intersex, such as in the case of some golden lancehead snakes, as there are slight differences to it being a true hermaphrodite. Fittingly, along the slithery part of the Gorgon, we can reach out and now overanalyze the dangerous layer of the serpents upon his or her, its head. Considering how the snake bodies visually merge here, the skull of the Gorgon would most likely not be as solid as ours at the crown, as at the least the snake's nerve bundles would lead into the skull through tiny holes. In this case, a larger head would make sense, as in the early depictions, where the Gorgon did in fact have a large head. Unless of course the nerves and possibly the trachea ran around the exterior of the skull into the body of the Gorgon somewhere through the upper neck region. The consequence obviously being an especially vulnerable area, and also one that could help explain why Gorgons, if as a species, have developed such a potent ability as the petrifying stare. I would imagine contemplating whether the snakes have any complex organs unnecessary, as the complex and complete entirety of the Gorgon can provide them with everything they need in order to hiss, squirm, and bite. And at this final chapter of the Gorgon's mysterious makeup, we return to his gender. I would be happy to amuse the idea of Gorgons being male and female, as well as being intersexual. Though looking back at the Gorgon's ancient designs and to that of possibly relating figures, sexual ambiguity is really prevalent. Again, even Aix or Aix, the Gorgon who was obscure in gender, supposedly fathered Medusa. So in the scope of pre-common era lore, no matter how mixed up it got, I would maybe ever so slightly lean towards Gorgons being hermaphrodites or intersexual. As far as the topic of breeding would go, it would be mostly similar as with mates of the opposite sex. If humanoid below, then reproduction would proceed as in humans. If reptilian, then as in reptiles. One last interesting aspect that deserves attention here are the breasts. If they're there, then why? Cold-blooded creatures such as this would appear to be don't require milk after birth. Therefore, your Gorgon could be warm-blooded and provide milk. Or, I ask you to consider this intriguing angle that Christopher Stoll brought up upon the breasts of mermaids in his book A Natural History of the Fantastic. It nicely illustrates the needlessness for nipples, as the quote-unquote breasts were evolved buoyant reserves of fat that aided the mermaid in swimming. And now this conception begs the question, which came first, the human or mermaid? Which evolved from which? Size. As for size, what we commonly see is like that of a human or taller. With the snake anatomy added, the weight composed with a humanoid counterpart would be estimated at an additional 300 to 1,000 pounds. Therefore, such a Gorgon's weight being in the range of 350 to 1,200 pounds, with a body length from 10 to 30 feet or even more. As aforementioned, Gorgons usually appear around this size but never really smaller. But how fun would it be to imagine smaller Gorgons? For example, with an associated snake type being a black and white king snake, or an adder such as a gaboon viper. Terror in a small compact package. Appearances. Color. If snake or reptile based, your Gorgon can virtually be any color we are able to perceive. Reptiles and amphibians are among the most colorfully diverse creatures on this planet. And so here as an artist, you can really let yourself go and get creative, but not without some great references to help keep your creation realistic. Think about what type of snake your Gorgon could be based off of. For instance, check out this cobra-based one for the God of War game. It has everything you'd hope for and more. If you're basing yours off of a known snake, then would you continue that species look onto the hair snakes? Or would you have different type of snake designs? One for the hair/snakes and another for the main body of the Gorgon. Would you at least keep the themes to a specific group of snakes, such as venomous or non-venomous? Maybe the Gorgon's snake body would be that of a non-venomous python, or say your Gorgon has fangs of venom and therefore the snake body is that of a highly venomous coral snake. Or maybe your Gorgon's bottom half isn't based on a snake reptile type at all, but rather a lizard. It's closer to home with the Gorgon of those ancient awkward designs. But then again, we are talking monsters, and maybe you do want that very different look. On this, I would like to steer away from the idea that the Gorgon is a reptilian at all. When we return to later Hesiod's version, we are reminded that Gorgons were the result of the union between Phorcys and Cato, who also as brother and sister were the result of Gaia's, Mother Earth's, union with Pontus, who was also Gaia's creation, or son. Confusing? Bear in mind that there are conflicting family trees of Greek mythologies, and to create a clear one for you would be even more of a headache than the animal kingdom diagram I designed and presented on the channel. And back to the point, Pontus was the personification of the sea. His bonded son and daughter Phorcys and Cato, as mentioned before, were naturally also both sea deities. Therefore, I would think it more appropriate for the Gorgon daughters to be more like their parents and be more aquatic/marine bodied, like having lower bodies of fish, possibly even combined with crabs or crayfish, relating more to Phorcys's anatomy. But this could easily get confusing with mermaids and such. In this case, I would suggest for the Gorgons to have the lower bodies of eels, as they are more sea and marine related than snakes. But what could even be more pleasing is finding a stronger middle ground between the snake and sea aspect of the Gorgon. And this, my friends, are sea snakes. They are very aquatic, fully adapted for marine life, maybe even more so than sea turtles. Their colors and patterns have a brilliant range, and they are highly venomous. What a Gorgon that would be! Possibly very similar to this Naga. Would it be purely aquatic or amphibious? Also, don't forget to factor in, if your Gorgons do indeed come in two sexes, what are the differences between them? In snakes, for example, the differences are unrecognizable to the common eye, whereas in fish, they may vary greatly. And as a final note to the appearances of Gorgons, do keep in mind the scales skin layout if you are to apply scales. Snakes have large bottom scales, while in lizards, you don't see that much variation in scale size. And although it may be tough, but maybe your Gorgon is even more unique and has a completely different layout of scales that no creature on Earth we know of has. Personality and character. Cold and dry, or rivaling with the Gorgon's appearance, warm and ultra-caring. Going back to the serpents of now, I would picture a reclusive nature, an attitude of, if you don't bother me, I won't bother you. But with that godly blood in them, who knows, Gorgons could flow as agreeably with others as the tides, or splash upon thee in the vein of a horrendous wave, or both, depending on the mood or season.
Classification.
Older possible additions being demonic or very ambiguous in form. The more commonly known versions, human-animal hybrid, or monstrous humanoid.
Life.
Layer and ecology. In history, Gorgons have been mentioned to reside within ocean waters, to secluded islands, or even at the entrance to the underworld. With this and all that was previously discussed, we can also safely assume they would be fond of warm climates and seclusion, particularly if they are as rare in your story as they are in the Greek. Culture. The society would most likely be quite private, with the young being raised by the public rather than in small families. Parents may or may not stay and breed together, but rather act so freely within the culture. Depending on how the young are spawned, most snakes produce eggs, so possibly there would be greatly honored portions upon the Gorgon lands where the eggs are highly protected and overseen by particular individuals. Or if live birthed, as with boas, the young are immediately directed and schooled and or trained. Do they produce only a few or a single young as humans, or more as some serpents, parenting in the vicinity of 60 or more? Is a deadly ability inherent at birth or at a specific age that is celebrated within their customs? Are they immune to one another's gazes or not, and therefore there exists no real society of Gorgons? Or suppose they aren't immune but still have found ways by which to live together in peace. Maybe they've created some kind of one-way blindfold. I wouldn't expect there to be much in the sense of hierarchy. Maybe just one individual or those that associate themselves closer with their gods. And due to their intimidating ability, military training and awareness would most likely be present from early on in their lives. Depending on the structuring of their teeth and interior organs, Gorgons could either be carnivorous or omnivorous, having both a diet of meats and plants. Would such folk, such people, be in the right mind to depend on tools, weaponry, or armor? If so, I'd suggest lighter, tightly fitted armor, ranged weapons to better expose their enemy's attention, in order to eternally immobilize them, spears to keep such foe at bay, and possibly harpoons to aid in their aquatic hunts or battles. With the addition of snake venom, these pointies could serve very well. If there is indeed a composed society, traps placed upon the borders could work wonderfully in exposing attacker eyes to the Gorgons, one solely based on making curious or intimidating sounds alone. quicksand, or swamps, or just treacherous created paths would all work neatly as they strongly encourage eyesight. How major would the factor of magic be within such a world? Would the Gorgons see their deathly sight as a curse and ban magic from their culture? Or would they embrace magic, even more so because of their natural ability? Would this create factions and major unrest among the people?
Strengths and weaknesses.
Those strengths, the obvious ones first. Death/petrifying/stoning gaze or visual presence. Speedy movement over and through land and water if partial snake-bodied. That's for the universal Gorgon. Your lore or the lore you follow out there may show them as cunning, skilled with particular weapons, etc. Weaknesses. Possibly being too dependent on their petrifying ability, resulting in arrogance, blind aggression, and being physically weak. If cold-blooded, then cold conditions.
Allies and enemies. Factions.
Enemies. In mythology, general humanity, and boisterous heroes, and of course Athena and Poseidon. Merfolk and Naga would possibly befriend due to anatomical similarities, but all speculation, and dependent on the lore you are enjoying or creating. For more speculation in this area, head back to the culture section of the episode.
Power level.
A 1 being a worm, a 5 a worm such as this, and 10 a primal deity beyond the matters of time and insignificant quarrels of lesser gods. Now this one required more thinking, as any number that I may unveil can be quite arguable. So after much consideration, I'm giving the Gorgon a very respectable 5. This including largely reliant on the generalities of the petrifying stare, for without it I give it a 4. Though if it's the appearance of the Gorgon that petrifies, and the effect is extreme, then a 7, 8, or even higher would seem right. Upon reflection, I also took upon one of Medusa's tales and how powerful her gaze was even after death, and the manner through which she was defeated by Perseus, half god. Yet with that I have to keep in mind that that was just one Gorgon's way of behavior and way of action. So knowing what we know, I think a 5 for a general Gorgon is a fair rank, as gifted individuals can always shift that number higher.
Similar beasts.
Our area of focus here will be on the more common take, the human-snake hybrid, with snake being the bottom half, also having snakes for hair, so trying to keep it specific. Medusa, Stheno, and Uriel, the Gorgon sisters. Naga. Typhon. Although much greater of an entity, he does have the serpent lower body, several of them, and even features wings, reminiscent of the very early depictions of the Gorgon. Echidna, the mother of monsters and Typhon's consort. Cecrops or Cecrops. Fuxi or Fusi. And Nua or Nua, also called Nugua or Nugua. Lamia, Wajet, Maratsagar. China's Madam Whitesnake and Greensnake depictions. Within written publications, Snake Lady of Goosebumps. Yig, a deity in H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos. Lady of the Green Kirtle of Chronicles of Narnia, Scion Leader of DC Comics, Snakefolk of One Piece, cartoons, Zafiro of Gargoyles, Cobra La of G.I. Joe, with a bit of a twist of things, King Hiss of Masters of the Universe, Snakeface of Masters of the Universe, Serpent of Ben 10, within video games, Crate of Guild Wars, Lady Vash of World of Warcraft, Nagaraja or Nagaraja of Dungeon Crawl, Vashnia of Dungeon Crawl, Salamander of Dungeon Crawl, within tabletop games, Aracto Brood of Void the Coralon, Yuanti of D&D, Merilith of D&D, Lilend of D&D, Beheaded of Pathfinder, Broken Soul of Pathfinder, Divine Guardian, and Siricta, also of Pathfinder. Medusian folk of D&D, where the Medusa are females and Madar are the males. Snake people of Cthon, Sultai Soothsayer of Magic the Gathering, within which I'm sure are many more Nagas and Gorgons and probably Medusas. And I did say that plural. Can you think of any more? Please let us know down below, and please no reptilian humanoids. no reptilian humans, as I looked and gone through actually over 80 of them, 80 examples. So please keep it more specific, and yeah, snake fairies. Huh.
Movies.
And we're staying with strictly Gorgons, not Nagas or other similars. My Son, the Hero, 1962. Faces of Dr. Lao, 1964. The Gorgon, 1964. Clash of the Titans, 1981. Snaker, also known as The Snake King's Child or Ghost Wife 2, 2001. Alexander, 2004. A Brief Scene. Clash of the Titans, 2010. Percy Jackson and Lightning Thief, 2010. The Lego Movie, 2014. Medusa, 2015. Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, 2016. The Twin Boys. The Lego Batman Movie, 2017. Monsterites and Monsterites. I hope you've enjoyed this episode on the Gorgon. Now, Medusa wasn't covered much here as she is a Gorgon, but it's not an episode dedicated to only Medusa, so we didn't explore her mythos that deep. So if you would like more information, a big episode on Medusa, do let me know down below. As a portion of this hopefully temporary goodbye, I would like to mention that we're in other areas of the internet as well, where you can search us out as World of Monsters or World of Monsters TV. And do please let me know what monster you would like us to analyze next in one of these episodes, or maybe a movie monster or a cryptid. Do let me know. As always, you've been watching All About the Gorgon, here only at World of Monsters. And if you want your enemy to tremble before your might, behold the Gorgon's head upon your defense. Right, and I do always try to present with respect, but even so, you always end up getting some beastie angry at you. No, I didn't call you a beastie. No, I didn't. No.